Are you an independent musician feeling overwhelmed by the endless act of juggling creativity, business, and self-care? You're not alone. That's why I created the Artist Mind Map. The Artist Mind Map is a free blueprint designed to help you get clear on the route you need to take to attain your career goals in alignment to your artistic values. This is not just another random PDF page for the forgotten corners of your hard disk. It's a timeless roadmap you can use for decades to come. Think of it as a go-to overview to consult. When you grab your free mind map, you get exclusive access to a masterclass that will take your career to the next level. I use the same methodologies and systems for my high-end paying clients and students. So why am I giving it to you for free? Simple. I want to build a community of artists who can count on each other for safe spaces. Music saved my life. I believe that you have all that it takes to be the artist you were meant to be, if you're willing to put in the work. And more importantly, understanding what that work is. And the Artist Mind Map was designed to help you do exactly that. So if this resonates with you, go to artistmindmap.com and download this resource. artistmindmap.com. Okay, so this is not the first time I'm actually talking about this, although if memory serves me right, I think the last time I did talk about this was just over a blog post. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure I haven't actually talked about this in the podcast yet. But last year I wrote this article, Why You Should Take It Easy This January. And this first version was at a time when the collective pressure to hit the ground running felt pretty loud. And earlier this year, my business coach and mentor, the very dear and brilliant George Carl, suggested that I make a ritual of sorts of updating it every year in January. So that's why I will keep updating this post every year, every January. And this is my first podcast episode on the same 2026. Here we are. Welcome to another session solo cast. These solo casts were designed to help independent artists and musicians like you navigate the very complex labyrinth that is your artistic practice and career. They're based on empirical research and experiences of my own career as an independent musician and an educator and coach working with artists just like you. The primary aim behind these sessions is to offer accessibility to the kind of education many of us need to work with in order to forward ourselves in these very confusing times as empowered and independent artists in the truest sense of the word. What's up, folks? How's it going? Okay, first podcast session. Well, I am session, but for first podcast session of the year, I thought I'd do a quick rough and ready version tonight. For context, I'm taking a flight to Asia where I'll be spending the first 3 months of my year of 2026. And I have my last couple of nights here in Berlin. It's been a great 7 months. And I thought I'd do a quick recording session for you folks. Being that it is that I'm not quite sure when I'll be in the recording studio again. It should be soon enough, sometime next week. But while I had some time to spare and I was feeling this, I thought I might as well just go for it. Why you should take it easy in January this year. I want to start off talking about some mythology. The mythology around the clean slate. Now, before I go further, I'd like to address the presumption that comes with this entire concept. Beneath what is basically a form of anxiety that's quite conflated, really, with the whole New Year's shebang. The whole idea that January 1st represents a natural beginning. Now, here's the thing. The Gregorian calendar was proclaimed, to the best of my research, please feel free to look this up on your own, by the way, but to the best of my research, the Gregorian calendar was proclaimed in 1582 as a reform of what was known as the Julian calendar. and was mostly an administrative and Christian tool, really. Please feel free to go and check up on this on your own if any of this sounds debatable to you. So, an administrative and mostly Christian tool designed to coordinate Easter, not necessarily to actually track what we tend to do with it, which is human energy. Does that make sense? Let me repeat that whole thing again once more. The Gregorian calendar, the calendar most of us follow around the world, was proclaimed in 1582 as a reform for the Julian calendar and was an administrative and mostly Christian tool designed to coordinate Easter, not to track human energy. So these numbers we've outsourced to what is essentially our entire life to, in one way or the other, are not really grounded in biology or neuroscience or even the rhythms of the planet with the kind of flawlessness they tend to imply. In fact, in reality, the Earth's movement, our beautiful little planet, is a continuous elliptical loop. It's a loop, which is probably why older cultures oriented time around things like solstices and lunar cycles, aligning more with our physiological shifts. Now, I'm not a qualified scientist, so I can only repeat, please go up and check out these facts for yourself if any of this sounds debatable to you. Modern timekeeping basically prioritizes coordination over lived experience. And research confirms that humans, on the other hand, possess a form of seasonal sensitivity. We have internal clocks, biological clocks, and these internal clocks don't reset as neatly as some of us think they do, just because the quote-unquote calendar flipped. So the point I'm trying to get to with this is, if this is a time of the year that does not feel like a fresh start to you, chances are you're not imagining it. You might simply be experiencing a gap between what is essentially a 16th century administrative tool and your own biological reality. 2025 was a pretty intense year for me. So I'd like to share my primary realization that the year brought with it for me. And if I could shorten it to a header, which I did on the blog post, it would be called, and is called, regulation over routine. So 2025 for me had intense peaks and troughs, high highs, scary lows. It was my first major tour, international tour, even though not in the conventional sense of the word, but first international tour with 3 back-to-back high-profile and intensive artist residencies amidst continents. Some serious recording projects, navigating health scares in close family, all while juggling bases across vast distances, continents again, at the risk of sounding repetitive, and also graduating from an intensive mastermind with Peter Crone, a mastermind that is not for the faint of the heart. And 2025 was also about collaborating with creatives in multiple capacities. Creatives with an extraordinarily diverse background based not just on culture, but factors like age, genre, industry, mindsets, location, and career goals. This was also the year I finally opened up, after years of requests and queries, I finally opened up my coaching to vocation agnostic modalities. Now, if that's too much of a fancy word, my clients now don't include artists and musicians exclusively, although they're still the bulk of my roster. The one insight, though, through all of this that rose above the rest throughout the year was this. Nothing has had a greater impact on my creative life than learning to regulate my nervous system. Nothing has had a greater impact on my creative life than learning to regulate my nervous system. Not productivity, not discipline, not quote-unquote better systems, though all of these can help. My nervous system has come to the central point of my focus in 2025. I've invested a lot of time, energy, and even money into understanding this practice better. Because this realization is not abstract for me anymore. It's revealed itself as the foundation of everything I value in my work. Consistency, confidence, authenticity, quality, and meaningfulness. That being said, the case for slowing down, especially in a month like January, can feel counterintuitive. Especially for creatives, especially for self-employed creatives, especially for artists and musicians. Planning tours, launches, workflows, and releases, all of this going on makes it quite tricky to take it easy in January. Usually it'll end up feeling like a bit of a risk. But despite that feeling, I would contend that stepping away from the noise is not a retreat. It's calibration. It's alignment, a word you'll have heard often if you've listened to a few of my podcast episodes. January offers a rare window to assess not just what we're doing, but the internal state we're doing it from. Here are some thoughts on why. To start off with, creativity requires bandwidth. Creativity requires bandwidth. Chronic activation narrows your perception. A dysregulated nervous system cannot access divergent thinking. Neuroscience confirms what artists have always sensed at some level, that breakthroughs often happen in the quiet. Maybe not always, but often, and I'd even go as far as to say more often than not, it happens in the quiet, behind the scenes. Burnout is a failure of regulation, not ambition. That's my second point. For us creatives, the constant exposure to algorithmic pressure and opportunity-driven urgency keeps the system in a state of prolonged vigilance in a way, without us necessarily realizing it. And this will often end up eroding the trust in your own perception. And the third point I'm going to make in my to rest my case is strategy requires safety. Now that word gets thrown about a lot of debate surrounding it, but to keep things simple in the context of what we're talking about now, when you're overloaded, planning is reactive as opposed to creative. Yeah. So the most effective decisions come when your system feels safe enough to think clearly. 5 anchors I would recommend, or at least invite you to consider, as I usually say. 5 anchors for a regulated year that I would invite you to consider are: 1. Distinguish goals from feelings. Most goals are just symbolic attempts to feel safe, free, or legitimate. I would request you to try and identify the feeling you're chasing instead. When the felt experience, that's terminology actually, that comes from, that's psychological terminology actually, the felt experience, and down the line maybe this can be something we can talk about too. But when that feeling, which is roughly referred to as the felt experience, becomes the priority, external circumstances not just fall into place more easily, in my experience, but often even reorganize themselves to match. That might sound a little woo to a lot of people, but at this point, neuroscience is actually catching up with some very interesting evidence to back this up. For now, that's my first point. First of 5 anchors I would recommend. Distinguish goals from feelings. Number 2, track capacity, not just output. Notice which activities expand your energy and which quietly drain it. Sustainable creativity comes from what your system can metabolize, not just what you can endure. Think about it like food. You can take all the protein you want, but that muscle you might be trying to build will have no chance at the kind of growth you're probably hoping for if your digestive system isn't actually processing the protein in the food you're taking. So that was number 2, track capacity, not just output or input for that matter. Number 3, design explicit stopping points. Regulation is enforced or reinforced not by how you start, but by how you end. Oftentimes anyway. So probably not a hard and fast rule, but clear endings protect your attention and build long-term self-trust. What this hints at is also our abilities and skill sets to build our boundaries. Another very misunderstood term, by the way. Boundaries, as I've often mentioned, are not walls we keep up to isolate ourselves, but just basically make sure we have clear cut. That's the one. Clear cut. That's the word you want to get a feel for. Clear cut lines between when something ends and obviously when it starts, because the start and the ending are correlative. So that was number 3, design explicit stopping points. Number 4, reduce noise before increasing effort. A couple of weeks back, I released a podcast episode called Signal to Noise Ratio. Highly recommended. The general takeaway here is that a flooded system can't really distinguish signal from noise. So your signal being your inner voice and your noise being the noise out there. So fewer inputs sharpen your intuition and your perception in a way that's a little more reliable than a plethora of new techniques and hacks and strategies. Maybe you don't need new strategies. Maybe it's dissolution you need. Dissolving. Again, not a hard and fast rule, but worth pondering over depending on which part of your journey you are in. And number 5, restore agency before attention. Prioritize analog restoration, walking, breathing, unstructured time to practice, or just do something you love. Connections, relationships, good food, good air, if you have the privilege of being in a part of the world where that is easily accessible. These aren't just breaks from work, they're the recalibration of your decision making. Now, at this point, I have a special note for my musician friends, being as it is that I don't only work with musicians anymore, but a special note for my fellow musicians here. I realize that a lot of you might have been programmed to think that growth is found solely in sharpening your technical skills. Technical skills are learning new repertoire or maintaining a disciplined practice schedule at your instrument or in the studio. And to be clear, you're absolutely right. The artistic practice is the foundation without which everything else eventually falls apart if that's not being nurtured the right way. But that being said, here's something I would invite you to consider as well. That maintaining that practice is only one step, possibly even the first step, maybe even the most important step, who's to say, but only one step. In fact, doing the technical work without aligned intentionality can not just fail to result in the growth we were hoping for, but even backfire badly. Now, to clarify, I'm not just referring to admin work here or your workflow, like not referring to tour plans and PR strategies and all the shebang that needs to be done as a professional musician, artist, or business owner. The importance of regulating our nervous system is something just as pertinent in the manner in which we approach our actual artistic practice as well. Now, ideally, the practice in itself will be a reset of sorts for our nervous system, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you might have to prepare very intense repertoire in a very short span of time, which will result in a certain brand of pressure and will probably shift your artistic practice from a space of therapy or healing to one of more professional delivery. So in cases like these, which are more often than not the norm for high-performing professional performers, it's really imperative that you have some skills in place to regulate your nervous system and act from a space where it is in fact in alignment and is regulated. At the end of the day, that's what really dictates, I know dictate is a strong word, but our nervous system literally dictates how we practice our instrument, how we serve the music, how we serve the art, how we stay sharp, how we compose, write, perform. In short, how we nurture our creativity, a general statement applicable to all creatives, musician or not. If you're practicing from a state of survival, we will end up teaching our bodies and our minds to associate our work with a sense of danger at some level or the other. And that, my friend, is a downward spiral you do not want to start off with. So, closing thoughts for you this January. The temptation to sprint into January is understandable. I get it. But choosing a slower entry could be groundwork, the kind of groundwork you've been meaning to get into for a while. And when done right, doesn't have to qualify as avoidance at all. For my bit, I'm going to check in a year later, next January, for this podcast episode. Just be clear, I will be recording more podcast episodes down the line as well, of course. But I think I'll continue to update this reflection, why you should take it easy in January. Come back to this next year. I'll update the blog post in the meantime. So by the time this podcast episode is out, you should have the updated blog post where you can listen to this episode as well. And let me know what you think. Comment on the blog or comment on any other platform you might be listening to this on. I look forward to hearing from you. And I think I'll keep doing this, not because the calendar demands it, but because the truth of it resonates with me since the first time I addressed this. So my guess is that's not changing anytime soon, at least not next year either. But time will tell. In the meantime, I hope you have an amazing year. Happy New Year to all of you folks, and I'll see you or hear you. You don't say that here. We don't hear you. We do say that in German actually. Auf Wiederhören. Which is kind of nice. Okay, not to go off on another German to English translation reference, which doesn't make sense. Hope you're having a fantastic new year, and I hope that helped. Hey folks, I hope you found that episode helpful. Here's a little request. If you did, consider sharing this episode with your folks. Think about the ways in which they might benefit the way you did. And please don't ever hesitate to reach out if you have queries. My name's TL. I'm an independent musician and educator and the founder of the Holistic Musician Academy.